Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. I remember my first visit to China. It was not necessarily smooth, I will say. First city was Beijing. This was 1988 was my first visit. And I was selected to give a presentation to 300 automotive engineers. And I remember thinking, automotive, China? Do they have an automotive industry? Didn't have any sense of it. And it certainly was fairly nascent. However, it certainly has evolved. I stayed at the Sheraton Great Wall in Beijing, and that becomes a memory because I tried to plug in my normal razor and the 220 volts didn't really appreciate that. And so my razor didn't work. I showed up at the meeting semi-shaved and cut to shreds through trying to use the local razor. Worse yet, and I think this goes to two things. One is not just China, but for international work, you have to be flexible and you need to be resilient no matter what happens. Things happen unexpectedly, even when you're a senior person. I see Todd Cornell here in the screen, spent 20 years in China, very experienced, and undoubtedly Todd experiences what I experience even now, where you get surprised and you just have to think on your feet. That day, I was not very experienced. I'd probably only been overseas a couple times, and there I was. And I had a big stack of transparencies that I was going to be presenting over 3 hours. And the power went off. And I was told that there were rolling blackouts and there were times when there wasn't power, which somewhat scared the bejesus out of me. And then sure enough, the power was not on when I was told to present in front of these 300 folks at age 27. So that was very exciting, but it taught me to be calm, and it taught me to bring samples of stuff. Fortunately, I had brought car part samples, and I was able to not BS my way, but to some extent BS my way through a conversation for 3 hours, and with Q&A and things like that. So that was a long time ago. China has evolved amazingly. What a country, and a population of people, and an economy that now is, depending on how you measure it, the number one in the world. There's certainly a lot of issues related to how China plays with others in the sandbox and how easy or difficult it is to do business there. There are complaints, and there's also ways of getting around what is just the practicality of markets. You know, when you're doing business internationally, you have to be flexible. You have to know what the realities are, and you need to be flexible through all of that. We're not here to judge. We're just here to say, what are the opportunities and how can we take advantage of those opportunities as business people? We're going to start our conversation today with Min-Kyung Kang. She is an intern at Global Chamber from Incheon, South Korea. You probably know that as the airport area outside of Seoul. So she's in the Seoul area. She's a student there and a graduate, and her interest is international trade with a focus on China. And so as she came over months ago, we've had her focused in on developing the Global Chamber presence in China. So Min-Kyung, thank you for that. Part of that effort has been to put together a beginnings of a series of programs on China. And so we selected at first Min-Kyung to mimic to some extent what we did a year ago with South Korea, which ended up resulting in a number of chapters. In fact, the entire country being populated with chapters. And then in Japan, where we have 14 chapters that came out of a similar type of approach during the summer. And now here in December, we're starting that with China to have her give an overview by city of what some of the opportunities are, somewhat of an introduction to China, and what some of the markets and industries and opportunities are. And then we're going to have our keynote speaker, Arnold Ma, who is a leader on getting products into China. And his company, Cumin, based in London, does helps companies be successful in China. The other aspects of this conversation is that we've got a number of other really extraordinary experts that we'll be introducing along the way, who will provide their perspective on their view of what they've heard from Mingqiang and Arnold, and then build on that with ideas and thoughts of their own. So I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation. Hopefully you will. We're going to try to keep it free and open so that if you have a question when it comes time for Q&A, we'll have some time to answer your questions. We have extended our normal 60-minute program to a 90-minute Globinar today. And so we will plan to end at the 90 minutes. I know for both the Japan and Korea ones, I think we were fairly close to the 90 minutes. We were able to keep fairly close to that. And so we'll try to honor your time by doing that today. So our first speaker is Mingqiang. Mingqiang, we look forward to your conversation. Do you have your program loaded all up? And we look forward to learning more about your perspectives on the different regions of China and the industries and opportunities.
First of all, and thank you for introducing me, Doug, and I'm gonna share my screen.
Great. And there it goes. Thank you.
Can you guys see clearly? Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me start. Hello, everyone. As Doug mentioned, I am serving as a global chamber intern with an emphasis on China. And my name is Mingqiang Kang, and I'm from South Korea, and you guys can call me just Min. So today, I'm going to give you guys a quick presentation about doing business in Chinese cities. As you guys already know, China is the world's most populous city, followed by India and America. And their GDP in 2021 is 17.73 trillion US dollars, which is second after the US. And their population is 1,426 billion. And China has been growing very fast, and now it became one of the most powerful countries in the world. Since China is too big to explain in general, so we are going to look at China's major cities, each in depth. We are focusing on the cities that we are known for their industry and economy. This includes Beijing, Shanghai, and Chengdu, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. And just let you know, guys, that all the statistics of this presentation is from the website called China Briefing. So our first city is Beijing. As you guys already know, Beijing is the capital of China. And Beijing is the country's political and cultural center. They have a population of 21 billion, and Beijing is home to the headquarters of most of China's largest state-owned companies, and they houses the largest number of Fortune Global 500 companies in the country. The city is largely a post-industrial economy and has the biggest tertiary industry as a proportion of GDP among all Chinese cities. The city and Beijing has highly developed financial, service, R&D, cultural, and education industries too. Specifically, the added value of Beijing's modern service industry, which is like financial, technology, information services, and other advanced services, contributed to around 60% of its GDP in 2021. And we can consider the digital industry in Beijing. They are focusing on innovations in vital technologies across a range of industries, including high-end semiconductors, artificial intelligence, critical software, blockchain, privacy computing, and operating systems for urban environments. And they are focusing on high tech too. There currently well over 1,000 AI-focused businesses in Beijing, especially Zhongguancun Science Park is the center of the most of these technological innovation activities, both in terms of startup growth and corporate research and development. And culture, sports, and entertainment are all drivers of growth in Beijing too. The revenue from core cultural fields accounted for more than 90% of the total earnings of Beijing enterprises. So we can tell that cultural industry is also very important in Beijing. And let's move on to Shanghai here. Shanghai is China's commercial capital and most populous city, with a storied history of foreign economic and cultural exchange. Shanghai is known as China's most international city. Shanghai is transforming into a post-industrial economy like Beijing. Its tertiary industry or service sector accounts for over 70% of the city's GDP and is still rapidly growing. As Shanghai is the most international cities in China, so the foreign investment and trade is also remarkable. Shanghai's trade volume also set a new record in 2021 with $605.5 billion US dollars in total imports and exports. And a total of 6,708 new foreign invested enterprises were registered in Shanghai in 2021. And Shanghai's largest trading partner in 2021 was the EU, followed by the US and Japan. And, Shanghai is often a forefront of pilot reforms and economic liberalization. In September 2013, the first pilot free trade zone in mainland China was established in Shanghai. The goal is to establish a relatively mature system of investment and trade and more open functional platforms by 2025 and become a special economic function zone with strong global market influence and competitiveness by 2035. Now we're heading to Shenzhen, which is often dubbed as China's Silicon Valley. And Shenzhen is China's premier special economic zone for foreign investment. So foreign trade and investment in Shenzhen is very active like Shanghai. Shenzhen is China's largest exporting city, ranking first among China's main cities for 29 years in a row. And the port of Shenzhen is fourth largest in the world, which is remarkable. And Shenzhen exported the highest volume of goods to Hong Kong. Shenzhen is really close to Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Shenzhen imported the largest of goods from Asia. And their technology industry is the beating heart of their economy, and it leads the country in the digital economy too. Some of the largest names in the technology industry are headquartered in Shenzhen, like Huawei and Tencent. And Shenzhen is also a pioneer in developing regulations for emerging and high-tech industries too. And then manufacturing remains an important mainstay industry in Shenzhen's economy. Major companies with a presence in Shenzhen include electronics manufacturer Foxconn and battery manufacturer CATL. And there are multiple manufacturing sectors saw explosive growth in 2021, including new energy vehicles, industrial robots, smartphones, and 3D printing. And now we are heading to Guangzhou, which is really close to Shenzhen. Guangzhou is the capital city of Guangdong province and is a real important political, economic, industrial, and cultural center in the South China region. Their key industries are automotive industry, electronics, and new information technology industry, infrastructure investment. The city has strengthened its position as a leader in China's automotive industry. Guangzhou has created 13 centers for automotive technology and innovation and has already made routes available for testing self-driving cars. Guangzhou is also famous for a strong industrial foundation in intelligent terminals, information communication, and 5G network, etc. And especially ZTE, one of the world's largest telecommunications manufacturers, is also based in Guangzhou. And they have Harman and Samsung, which is international firms thriving in this area. And our final destination of our journey is going to be Chengdu, which is located in the middle of China, unlike other cities. Chengdu is one of the 3 most populous cities in Western China. And what makes Chengdu an attractive investment destination in Southwest China? Chengdu has become known for technology and innovation, industry, transportation, and also they have Shangliu International Airport, which is one of the biggest airports in the world. And they have 4 industrial zones and presence of over 250 Fortune 500 companies. All right, we have talked a lot about Chinese cities today, but there's more cities having business opportunities. So we can have a brief look at 4 other cities right now. Other major cities include Hangzhou, which is the capital of China's Zhejiang province, and Chongqing, which is the largest and richest city in Western China, and Wuhan, the sprawling capital of central China's Hubei province, and lastly, Suzhou, large industrial parks, multiple ports, and advanced manufacturing infrastructure are there. And lastly, but additionally, let's take a look at Taiwan for a little bit. Their population of Taiwan is 23.855 million, and their GDP is $550 billion US dollars, which is gauged in the high-income economies group by the World Bank. And Taiwan's dominant industries are semiconductor manufacturing, information technology, and electronics. Especially Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which is known as TSMC, is the world's most valuable semiconductor company and one of Taiwan's most important companies too. They have also an office here in Phoenix, Arizona too. Yes, this is what I prepared for today's Globinar, and I hope you guys get a little bit of insight of China today. And I really thank you for your attention. And I want to turn it over to Arnold Ma, who is CEO at Cumin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that was a great overview. Really appreciate it. Before we turn it over to Arnold, could we just I mean, there's a lot here, right? It's huge economy. To spend, a few minutes on kind of an overview is kind of almost really not doing it justice. But love the fact that you were able to do that. I know, like with Todd Cornell, you spent a lot of your time in Harbin, and we learned about Harbin through the Global Chamber when you talked about that area and the numbers of cities, dozens and dozens of cities with 5 million or more people in China. I think it's 93 or some ungodly number, like inconceivable number. There's so many different places, and so Min really has just kind of scratched the surface here. Does anybody have any from the speakers, any comments, kind of general comments before we turn it over to Arnold, and I'd like Gabor to also make some comments. And that's fine.
I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here.
Fantastic. What's your
Actually,
reaction? Because it's pretty, that's at least the beginning, right? And I think you had some additional comments you wanted to make as well.
Yeah, it's a beginning, but I think it's a good beginning because, well, if we usually use this figure of speech of starting from the big picture, then China is a really big picture. So we have to start from somewhere, and then we can start with the basics to inform and also to impress, because whichever industry you are in, China is, especially if you have been in business for a while, let's say for a decade or two, then China kind of sneaks up on you very often. As you yourself said, automotive industry in China, one of my university professors used to be the chief representative of Volkswagen in China. And then he went to China when basically private citizens were not allowed to own a vehicle. And what China did in terms of automotive industry is that they exported something like 3 dozen cars to North Korea a year. And then suddenly, China has become one of the biggest automotive powers. Now, we can tell people that Chinese people buy more than half of the diamonds in the world, they use half of the cement and steel in the world, that they produce more than half of the beer in the world. Very often and very fast, this is going to be confusing to people who try to do business in China. So, okay, we can start from the statistics with a presentation, but where do I start, so to speak? If I am an entrepreneur or an investor or the executive of a multinational company, where can I grab this picture? Where can I discover business opportunities? And usually what I say is learn everything you can about China because it's a fantastic story, but always keep in mind that whether your business is going to be successful or not is not about China. It's not about what you learn about China. It is going to be about a dynamic combination of what you want to do and what you put into the cooperation and China itself. And let me just mention one or two things about this. First of all, when we say China, of course, we mean many, many things. Min mentioned quite a few cities. All of those cities where we can find these so-called special economic zones, which are basically institutional islands of globalized business within a People's Republic of China, whose legal system, financial system, political system is kind of poorly compatible with liberal democracies and countries whose primary economic organization is based on a capitalist system. So basically, China carved out these special economic zones so that the legal system, the financial system, the general way of doing business is more understandable to foreigners. Not only investors and entrepreneurs and executives, but even people who visit China. And statistics show that over 95% of the foreigners who ever have been to China, as tourists, as business visitors, as expats, as students, basically experience these special economic zones and the cities around them, places like Shanghai, places like Shenzhen, and then increasingly places like Chengdu, Chongqing. And of course, it's a completely different environment there as it is in the real China, if I may use air quotes. If you go out of these special economic zones and the cities around them, which kind of ironically, historically speaking, they are the same cities mostly that have been either concession ports or large international settlements about 100 years ago, then the risk of doing business and the difficulty of doing business is going to be significantly higher. But of course, the returns are going to be higher as well, because there is unfulfilled demand in all of these places. Also, it is not just a question about the culture or the environment, but also who you send there. Because I have seen more than one company that sent their best people, sometimes their founders, to do business in China. Then they bankrupted the company back home because nobody was able to run the business without the people who were trying busily to start a new chapter in China. And so, of course, out of temperament, because of their international experience, some people are going to be much more suitable for running businesses in China, especially if they have spent years in international markets. The last thing I would like to say is why this picture is dynamic, because China is changing fast, the world is changing as well. So the combination of an international company or an international investor starting something up in China is going to keep changing all the time. So for instance, if you looked at a typical technology company from a world-leading country like Holland or the United States, around the time when I moved to China in 2002, the cultural gap and the technical gap was much bigger than today. But if you look at the influence of geopolitical factors on the business, they were much smaller than today. So it keeps changing all the time. And this is why I find it quite important that Min mentioned all these large mainland Chinese cities, but you also mentioned Hong Kong and Taiwan. Because I know that China is working very hard to ease the zero COVID restrictions, but these things work very, very slowly. And I have just read the new Internation study about which are the most popular expatriate destinations in the world right now. And one of the things I would be very happy to send you the link if you contact me to this entire report. But one thing I saw is that China took a huge hit. Apologies, this is something that there is a problem with my cameras. So China took a huge hit in terms of popularity among talented expats who have the option of going to different places. However, and this is where what Ming said comes in as very important, there is a new kind of economy shaping of doing business with China, not in China, but around China, so to speak. So if you look at the movement of expatriate talent, which is one of my specializations, in places like Hong Kong and Taiwan, but also Thailand, Singapore, Seoul in South Korea, and a couple of other places, basically people try to be in the same time zone. Sometimes on paper, they even belong to the mainland Chinese business unit of their organizations, but physically, especially the ones who have families, they are managing their China operations from a nearby location. And this is very, very important, because if you run an international business, and if you want to choose the people who can run your international business, of course, it is going to be an enormous difference in terms of temperament, in terms of acclimatization, whether you are sending somebody into a place like Chengdu, right in the middle of kind of easing, but slowly easing zero COVID policies, or you are sending somebody to remotely run a China team from Bangkok or Singapore. The suitability of the specifications of the person you want to send them are going to be completely different. I hope these thoughts help. And of course, I will stay here until the end of the hour. Unfortunately, I cannot stay longer. And I very much look forward to hearing from your thoughts, and especially to Arnold's thoughts.
Fantastic. All of us do. Thank you. One quick question. You mentioned about 20 years then in China. What's your passion? What's your interest in China? And then, forward, I presume you want to stay involved and connected.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I still have my team in China. I still have my company in China. I run a team of intercultural leadership consultants. So basically, we are helping Western multinationals, predominantly American and European multinational companies. We work with their high-level management basically to manage across cultural borderlines. So you can imagine a Western executive running an Asian team or a mixed team. You can imagine an Asian executive who is promoted to an international management position in a Western multinational company. And eventually they have to run mixed teams and Western teams as well. So I'm specialized in coaching, training, advising executives like this. How I ended up in China is a long story because I had two unlikely guiding stars to China. One of them is martial arts, because I've practiced martial arts since I was a teen. And the other one is philosophy, which was my first studies. Then I went on to study linguistics, and then eventually I studied diplomacy, and I became a junior diplomat. And in 2002, I left a budding diplomatic career, went to China with 2 suitcases, and in a couple of years, I started up the consultancy that I'm still running. So I'm talking to you from Europe, from Hungary right now. But we are still, with my team and with my strategic partners, we still run the same projects in mainland China and all over the Asia Pacific.
Fantastic. Congratulations on a great career and continued great work. Thanks for being a member of Global Chamber. Let's now go. Thank you. Let's now go to Arnold. Arnold, as I mentioned earlier, maybe before the recording, met maybe a couple years ago on Clubhouse, and there were a few things that really impressed me: his knowledge, his capability, his passion, and ultimately one of the alignments I know I have with him is that we should do trade, and there's ways of doing trade when there's opportunities, like there are so many huge opportunities in China. We should go after them, and so he's developed an expertise on how to do that. I just love what you're doing, Arnold, because you've weaved in the digital side of it so effectively. Congratulations on your work, and we look forward to hearing your presentation today.
Thank you, Doug. You guys hear me okay? You hear me, Doug?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yep. Yeah, can you hear me?
You can hear, okay, sorry, I'll just check in. Yeah, I can hear you. How long do I have, Doug, for this presentation?
That's a good question. How long would you, I don't remember, Min, what did you organize, Min?
20 minutes?
Yeah, you can presentate about 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
10 to 15 minutes. Okay, cool. No problem. All right, cool. Great. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'm going to try and talk fast. This is a 20-minute presentation. 10 to 15 shouldn't be a problem. So feel free to drop me a question, stop me anytime if you guys have any questions. Today, I was trying to think what I would talk about, and I think Gen Z is an interesting one, because a lot of times when I talk about China, I see it as kind of like a crystal ball into the future, right? Because what happened in China over the last couple of years, whether it's digital innovation or service design or adaptation of like certain technologies, service design, innovation over to the West. So I feel like even if people don't have a specific China focus that are listening to this right now, you might take some stuff away on what might happen rest of the world in the future. And a lot of times, because of these innovations and adaptation, China is generally leading the way in the change of our daily lives. So, and this is normally a quite interesting conversation for me, because Gen Z are generally in China leading the world, and they're finally starting to export culture. We had previously already slides about kind of like China growth. I like to show this slide, and some of you probably have seen it on the internet, because it just generally shows the scale of the change over the last 40 years, right? So in 1970s, China was just a poor country of farmers, and now it's one of the largest economies in the world. During this time, China has grown an average of 10% year on year for almost 40 years consistently. And that is absolutely incredible. Just to put it into context, China has lifted more than 800 million people out of poverty and that's more than the entire population of Latin America, Spain, and Portugal combined. And this is really relevant to us because it just highlights the scale of change that has happened in China over that period. The pace of growth is something I talked about a lot. The pace of growth has left huge cultural tensions, right? And that's really important for us as well, because no country in history in the history of humankind has ever grown this fast or has gotten so many people out of poverty. So I always say that wherever you go in China, almost around every corner, almost around every street corner, you can always bump into like some inspiration, some big idea, just because of the energy and the scale of change and the relationship people have changed as well, which I think is super important, that because of the 40-year growth, generally people have a very positive outcome associated with change. And that's what actually spurred a lot of these innovation, a lot of these positive technology or service designs. So out of everyone in China, for me, and I think because I work in marketing, so I'll be talking about this from a marketing context a lot of time, that Gen Z has affected this change more than anyone else, because they're the people that kind of stuck between two generations with traditional values and modern expectations. They've seen a completely different China, right? Even when I was growing up, I could consider myself a millennial, a bit older, slightly older millennial. When I was growing up in China, I was born in the 80s, late 80s, and I lived through China being a quite poor developing country. But the Gen Z we're talking about here, they've only really seen China where Uber was then the largest tech startup in the world, was acquired by a Chinese rival because it couldn't beat the Chinese rival on every aspect, whether it's cash flow or service design or technology. They were beaten and they were acquired, where ByteDance, as you guys know, owns TikTok and Douyin and a few other tech platforms, is now valued at $180 billion. It's still the largest startup in the world on TechCrunch. And it became the largest startup in the world in just 5 years' time. They literally changed the way that people use social media with TikTok to get people to rely 100% on AI to serve themselves social content. And that's never happened before, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or whoever it may be. It's a complete change to the social media platform content algorithms. And they essentially has really not been a bigger change around the world, whether it's culturally or economically, between the previous generation and also the current generation that we see in Gen Zs. So why do I always talk about Gen Zs and how they're influencing the world and generation China? Because, as I mentioned earlier, A, they're on the cusp of change, and two, the Chinese culture for thousands of years has pretty much remained similar in the standards and the way it's developed and deeply rooted society, until kind of recently when China has went on this kind of like an industrial revolution and started to modernize very, very quickly, such as one idea of really betting on your future, right? So a lot of, even my generation, and certainly the previous generation, we tend to bet our futures on the next generation due to uncertain economic outlooks. Or the idea, everyone probably know the idea of like collectivism and how China is a very collective culture. Collectivism before individual is always been unwritten rule in society to prioritize the family and then the state and then the self. Whereas compared that to the West, it's kind of more self, family, and then state. So all of these changes with youth generation born in 1990s, they don't really have these kind of like legacy attachments to tradition. They're still struggling between the two, but they're a lot more, a lot different in the way they have an outlook and the way they view their lives, especially for themselves. They don't have to bet the future on next generation, and they can afford to focus on themselves a little bit more. So, and these changes, the ones I mentioned earlier, has kind of spurred two things. One is what I mentioned about an innate confidence. So they have the confidence that maybe the previous generation, certainly myself, didn't have, because they've only seen a successful and a globally respected China as a culture, as society. And the second one is traditional values from their family versus modern expectation from the world they live in. So because of the global exposure, they have this conflict of collectivism versus self. So what's important is that based on the stuff I said earlier, there's a couple of things. One is that the perfect mix that have driven Gen Zs to create a very unique imagination to collect the culture of the 21st century. I'll go into this in a bit more detail later on, but they're essentially using their confidence and the focus on individual success to collectively improve China's position on the global stage. And a lot of that's to do with subcultures and microtrends. So they are, like, for example, right, they're turning mostly made in China, which has always been a very negative phrase, to designed in China, which is becoming very positive and very nationalistic in China among Gen Z and the youth audience. And we've seen with companies like DJI, you guys know, which makes most of the world's drones, or Tencent, or of course, like ByteDance we talked about earlier. One sec. So, and most importantly, as I mentioned at the start of the conversation, I think what Gen Zs are doing in China, because of not just the cultural export or the technology export, or anything that they're doing in China, but more, I think it helps us to understand, marketers specifically, but I think also in general for people who are just doing business with China, that it helps us to have a crystal ball into the future of media. So the future of marketing, the future of creative, and the future of innovation. And I think that they're about to effect some of the biggest changes we'll see in the world today in tech, in culture, as I mentioned. So again, understanding China, what's happening now is going to help us understand what happens in the future. So moving on to the kind of like the important stuff, now that the intro is over. First, I want to talk a bit about technology and what can Gen Z in China tell us about the future of technology, or more specifically, social media evolution. So I'm going to show you guys a slide. Does anyone know what social media platform this is? Anyone? No. Okay. I'm surprised. This is so this is MySpace. You guys heard of MySpace?
Are we
No,
on
you heard
slide
of
9?
MySpace?
Maybe we're not seeing it.
Oh, sorry, one sec.
It says first, let's talk
There
about
we go. There we go. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Do you guys know this social media platform? I mean, I've already given it away. It's MySpace. So, okay, cool. The reason I've included this is because MySpace for me was the first generation of social media, right? I started using it when I was at university, which is about 20 years ago now, just under 20, 15, 16 years ago. This was essentially the first time that we had a social media platform in the closest to the current form as there is, right? Before social media, we had like chat rooms, we had forums. They weren't really true social media. This is MySpace invented the concept of social feed, and it was very different back then. You had to go to essentially every user's profile in order to view their content. So the entire social media concept in MySpace was based on networks. You had to go to Kim Kardashian's page in order to see her content, right? So first generation of social media. And 5-6 years later, Facebook followed quite shortly after MySpace, but it took kind of like 4 or 5 years in order for Facebook to really start to become one of the largest social media platform in the world. And I classify this as the second generation of social media, right? So any social media that we use currently now, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of these I see as second generation of social media. And something these guys invented, I think it was by Facebook, is very interesting, is that they created the concept of aggregated feed. And this became the norm in the current generation. So when you go to social media pages, you view the content, everything's on your homepage, right? You don't have to go to people's individual profiles to view their content anymore. Everything's aggregated, albeit based on your network and based on the content that you interact with, you engage with, like and comment and so on and so forth. They'll feed you certain content based on the content available on your network. They may mix in like 5-10% of global content just to test your feed. Some do that more than others, but in general, the current generation for me is 50% network led, i.e. much of the content, pretty much all of it is based on your network. 50% content led, because there's still an algorithm in there to curate your feed based on what you like and what you don't like. And the next generation, or kind of like, I guess it's almost current now because it has been around for quite a while. And it's kind of like, this is where China comes into play, right? I remember way before COVID, I was in China, probably, this must have been 2017. So a long time ago now. I was sitting at dinner table, talking to my family, and my cousin started using Douyin, which is the Chinese TikTok, for those that don't know. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is incredible. And he was like scrolling through videos one by one, like full screen. So I've never seen a social media platform like this. And this was way before anything like that happened in the UK, right? So, and I instantly thought, I messaged my co-founder at the time. I was like, man, this is going to be the next biggest social media platform. This is absolutely amazing. And I was right. TikTok now is probably one that's not just one of the fastest growing social media platforms. It's not the largest by users, but if you look at the people that spend time on TikTok, it's insane compared to something like Instagram or any other social media platform. People spend huge amount of time on the platform. And this is exciting because I told that story because, again, it demonstrates that we were lucky enough to have preview of the next generation of social media before it even became the next generation of social media in the West. And this only really happens once every 5 to 6 years, right? Because what TikTok is different is that they made it so that you don't have a choice in the content you receive anymore from your network aggregated feeds. Everything is 100% AI driven. You're literally scrolling through each content piece by piece rather than selecting what to view. And not only that, it's not relied on network at all anymore. You are looking at the content. As soon as you open a TikTok account, it starts to learn what you do. Whether you don't even have to engage with it, right? Just the amount of times you view the video, how many seconds you view the video, all of these things will dictate what video they serve you next. And algorithm honesty is super accurate. You probably only need to open it 3 or 4 times in order for them to get a good read on the type of content you want. And this is amazing because it's the first time ever that's happened. So moving on from social media, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fourth generation of social media. What do I think the fourth generation is going to be? I think a mixture of a Web3 decentralized model. I love talking about Web3 because I think it's super interesting. Away from the platform model completely. And this is interesting because I remember when Facebook first announced Meta and they talked about how they're going to be, the new metaverse. I think it's almost ironic that they don't understand metaverse is fundamentally trying to change our reliance on platforms, and to create a platform for the metaverse is almost defeating the whole point of having a metaverse. I think a mixture of that, decentralized, i.e. each creator will own their own content and they will be having their own audience, and they almost become social media platforms themselves. And the second thing I think is virtual humans, which we're seeing a lot in China at the moment. We don't really have time to get into today, but the idea of a virtual human that you can then create and build a narrative around is super interesting, I think, for brands and also just for content creation in general. And finally, I believe we'll be shifting away from the TikTok model of full content to something that's more creator-led. So 50% content, 50% creator, in line with the fact that people will be owning their own content and their own audience. I'm gonna skip a few of these slides because I'm worried this will go on for so long. I have an example of kind of like a TikTok AI thing, but I want to move on to gaming very quickly because I think gaming is something that's very interesting. And I think is overlooked by a lot of people. So first of all, the reason that gamification in marketing is always becoming massive, always become very popular, is because people have always loved games. And what can Chinese Gen Z tell us about the future of gaming? So China is undisputed international esports capital of the world. Just in Shanghai alone, there's over 150 professional esports teams in just one city, right? And China itself has more than 500 million gamers, growing 10% year on year. And this is actually one culture that China has exported for me to the rest of the world. Pretty much before the last couple of years, like when Twitch became popular, China gaming has always been a very kind of niche and geeky hobby. It wasn't until China made it mainstream that it started to become more mainstream in the world. So I want to show you guys a video. Can you see this video?
Yes.
That you guys can. So I'm just going to let this play for a few seconds. And then I have some more videos here on the next slide. I want you, I don't know if anyone can guess why people are doing this, like what event this is for. Does anyone know? I'll be very impressed if anyone does. Any interest?
Any ideas?
Any ideas? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to have a crack.
Is it Double 11?
Good answer. A good answer, but it's not. Good guess, actually. Anyone else? If not, okay, cool. So this is
League of Legends.
Sorry?
The League of Legends, right?
Yes, you're right. Yeah. So the previous one, good guess. Previous one was League of Legends World Cup Finals, which happened, I think it was last year or the year 2021. So last year, and was it last year? I can't remember. Yeah, 2021 League of Legends for World Finals, and China's team EDG or Edward Gaming. Oh, sorry. Guys, sorry, do you mind if I just go quickly get my charger? My laptop's running out of battery. Give me one second, please. Speaking of technology, one sec.
We don't want to lose you. Technology. Good guess, Abdul Haq. Are you a gamer?
No, I'm not a gamer, but I know the addiction. I know the addiction of Chinese people for gaming. I've seen it, and if you lecture at any university in China, then you're pretty familiar with that.
Yeah, we're right at the top of the hour while Arnold is plugging himself in, and so where I'd like to go after this is we'll go to Christina and then Alan, and then
sorry, Doug. Doug, I can't. I have to leave also right now. I can't stay for the next half hour. I've got a client call.
Okay. Oh, that's a bummer. Could you at least introduce yourself while Arnold is plugging himself in?
Sure. My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. We are a corporate compliance and administrative firm that's headquartered in Hong Kong with our subsidiary in Shanghai. And I've been 18 years on the ground in Shanghai, but not been there for the last 3 years due to COVID.
Yeah, you help really well with kind of the details of actually setting up operations, working around the legal side of it and the government
the financial side of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great resource. Thank you very much. Sorry we'll hear from you.
No, it was lovely to come on. I'll speak to you soon. Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Christina also has a weekly program called Thrive in China. And if most of you are members of Global Chamber, every week we have a newsletter that comes out Monday. Very often we have the link to her weekly program. So it's on a variety of different topics, very detailed oriented around specific setups in China. So Arnold, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. I'm back.
Very, very good.
Okay, cool. So, sorry about that, guys. So the reason I've shown these videos is because I wanted to just demonstrate how big these events are, not just in China, but also globally, actually. So
Recording in progress.
there's only really, hello? Okay. There's only really one event in the world that comes even close to the scale of the League of Legends finals. And the reason it was massive in China was because China's team EDG won the World Cup or the World Finals. There's only one event that comes even close to this. It's happening right now, and it's a World Cup. So World Cup in 2018 had an average live audience of 517 million, which is massive. It's probably I think it's the largest sporting event or kind of like that kind of event in the world. However, the final League Legend was watched by 500 million people in China alone. And that doesn't count the global audience. So it just shows that the amount of people that is in this category compared to something like American football or baseball or basketball or football or the World Cup, as I mentioned before. And this next slide, I just want to show the video quickly as well. The reason I want to show this is because most people understand subcultures are different in China, but it's much harder to comprehend just how different they are and the extremities which they are different. So if the previous video wasn't enough, this video really drives the point home, I think. Gaming in China is less of a hobby, it's more of a mainstream sport. And you can see here the passion that these fans are having and showing, displaying when their team are having like an upset defeat where they should be expected to win in. You only really see in like mainstream sports, right, in the West. And just as this is going global, we're also seeing rest of the world, like Twitch streamers are finally becoming some of the most followed and the most paid people and most influenced people in the world. I actually have a Nike ad on the next video, but I'm going to skip that because it's not very good without the sound anyway. So just finally, I want to talk about what's next. And my prediction is that as esport goes mainstream globally, especially combined with the rapid development of the metaverse, that we'll see a huge realignment of the inflation of value of esport team and sponsorships. So you compare something like the reach of a team like EDG, we're talking about hundreds of millions of fans, right? Easily comparable to any top Premier League team or NFL team or any of the professional sports team in the world. However, the sponsorship and the running cost of the esports team versus a professional sports team is completely misaligned, right? Like we're talking potentially hundreds of thousands versus literally billions. Where the audience is about the same. And so I think for me, any smart money right now is going into gaming, is going to esports and building your own teams, sponsoring your teams. And I think there's huge opportunity in creating value there before everyone else realized there is value. And that's honestly what we did with TikTok. We created accounts on TikTok way before it became a massive account, way before it was much harder to gain audience and following, and that paid dividends for us as it is currently. So, and that's it. I hope that helps. A little preview into some stuff we do and some stuff we talked about, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Very good. Any questions for Arnold? Just unmute yourself and go ahead. Quick question while we're waiting, Arnold. It sounds like what you're able to do is through this knowledge of what's going on in the social media platforms is to be able to help companies as they're entering China to be able to use these platforms to be able to build business.
Sorry?
So you're utilizing your knowledge of these social media platforms to be able to help companies outside China enter the market in China.
Yes, exactly. So what I mentioned, a couple of things, just maybe put some context into them. One is understanding Gen Zs. So a lot of our clients try to, or they want to target Gen Z customer segment, but the best way to connect with them as a foreign brand is to authentically speak their language. If you don't understand where their hobbies are, their interests and subcultures are, it's really difficult to create a campaign that they will actually care about, i.e. build a meaningful connection. So I gave the example of understanding social media, where it's going and what the next big platform will be to connect with people, and two, gaming. And I think again is like an underutilized mechanic for people to build campaigns as a business to connect their audience in China.
Sounds great.
So Arnold, I have a couple questions for you, if I could.
Please go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, first off, I'm wondering, is this in the West, gaming is predominantly adolescent up to 25-year-old men or young men. Is this the same kind of gender bias in China as it is here in the US? And the second is the overall impact on labor productivity. I mean, I do some undergraduate teachings, and I can tell you that gaming is not a friend to learning and is not a friend to labor productivity. And it seems to be ramped up in China. Can you just talk a little bit about the implications of that in terms of Chinese productivity?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I don't think gaming in the West is still mostly adolescent under 25 male, because it might be more male lean, and I agree with that. But a lot of the gamers that we're talking to now, working people like Nike and Adidas, are actually millennials, right? So because a lot of people like myself, we grew up playing games, and I'm now 36. So we're finding the segment shifting from under 25s to more kind of like 30 to 40s. So that's changed a little bit, I think, because gaming is mature, there's a subculture. In China, that demographic is actually very different. Again, I'll tell you a story. I remember when I was sitting in a meeting over dinner in China, in Shanghai, with one of my friends who is the founder of an agency. They are 1 billion RMB business, so 100 million pound a year, and they were just about to IPO, and they had two funds on the table. And I asked him, why do you have two funds, right? I was expecting to say one is for business, one's for personal. It's not the case. One is for gaming, and the other one is personal and business, right? So he literally, this guy runs a 100 million pound business. He has a fund dedicated to gaming. And then we had a 20-minute conversation about being like, playing games in like clans and alliances, and how because we run businesses, we don't want to lead these alliances and lead other people in games. We just want to go in, kick some ass and relax. I remember playing PUBG, right, with one of the senior VPs of Tencent. Like these guys, it just demonstrates that everyone plays games in China, whether you are a kid in school or whether you are running like department of attention. Like this guy is responsible for literally billions of dollars, and the guy is like playing PUBG with me on the internet and just chatting. It's very different China. For me, it's very mainstream. In terms of productivity, I kind of agree with you. I think gaming at the hobby level is very distracting and very addictive, like a lot of entertainment-based hobbies. But I still think the future of gaming is that it's going to get more and more mainstream rather than more and more niche. And I think brands that are investing in it now is investing smart money.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Let's go next to you, Dr. Morrison. What would you like to share today?
Well, first off, Arnold, excellent, and Min, thank you for your update. Great group of people, and I'm happy that we can all sit and learn together. You know, my interest has been looking at multinational companies working and competing in and with China, but also looking at the backdrop of Chinese enterprises and what they're up to, and looking at this, you know, at certainly a state-owned enterprise level, but also far beyond that to the kind of network China model where the state is center, the model we call enterprise China, and how that structure is has provided huge advantages to Chinese companies, both within China, but also internationally, but also how it is it to some degree is an anchor on China's international competitiveness. So I just finished, the book came out a couple of days ago called Enterprise China. It's a 3-year kind of massive project with a colleague at INSEAD, Professor INSEAD, where we focus on this model, unique Chinese model for commerce, state-centered, monolithic, if you will, ecosystem-centered model called Enterprise China, and the implications for Western companies wanting to do business in China. Interestingly, there are over 1 million Western companies that have operations in China. Many don't have a full sense of why they're there. They don't have a clear strategy. They're kind of dabblers in the China market. And so as we were looking at, social media and looking at, the implications for brands and so on, a lot of Western companies aren't sure if they're there in China actually to access the Chinese market, or they're there to access upstream supplies. They have somewhat convoluted strategies. And because of that, I think they're at a significant disadvantage competing with an ever more competitive enterprise China model. So that's really what I've been focusing on after spending 30 years in and around China, looking at that model and how Western companies, serious multinationals, can and should be competing in vertical China and horizontal China.
What was your initial interest in China, and what keeps you so passionate about it?
I went to China first in 1989. Actually, was in Tiananmen Square when they declared martial law. I was there to actually write what became the best-selling case series in the world for several years, Kentucky Fried Chicken in China, and how Western companies establish themselves, ingratiate themselves in China. Since then, I've been back. I've spent a huge amount of time as a visiting professor at both Tsinghua University and CEIBS, China European International Business School, also running countless executive programs for multinational companies in China and Greater China more broadly. So for me, China has been a fascinating story of a country with a very clear strategy for advancing itself on the world stage. And most Western companies are unaware of the state strategy, if you will, to promote business. They focus on the tactics, but they ignore the strategy. And the strategy going all the way back to Deng Xiaoping was to pivot China from being wholly dependent on the rest of the world for technology to ensuring that the rest of the world is dependent on China. So it's really flipping the tables in a 40-year strategy with regulations and policies that are supporting this, what we call these 3 strategic pillars of enterprise China. Fascinating book, research, and really a roadmap for Western companies that are either competing in China or they're at home and they're not doing anything in China, but nevertheless, they're facing severe Chinese threats from nascent international global competitors.
Great. And you're still teaching on China at Thunderbird School of Global Management, which I recognize in the background. I was actually in that room last night. So
I thought I saw you there. No, I'm kidding.
That's the new building that Thunderbird is, the new headquarters in downtown Phoenix,
right,
on the Arizona State University downtown Phoenix campus, and that's the Global Forum,
right,
where we hold events. Last night's event was just down the hall from that, where our headquarters is, and then
right,
on the 5th floor. Thanks
and
for
the pub upstairs. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm on the 4th floor. We're a highly global school with alumni in virtually every country around the world. Our classes are incredibly diverse, and China has always been a critically important topic for our students, for our faculty. Certainly for me personally, it's been a passion to understand the Chinese model better, but more so to help Western companies manage their way in and through this enterprise China model.
Thank you for sharing today. And I'm in the midst of an email that copies you with our book author leader within Global Chamber and Ghazal Khorshidi, who's our main contact, to get you involved with that. We do a monthly conversation about books that our members
You won't see it, but that's the book. It doesn't come up on the virtual screen, but it's a great book. We're getting great reviews.
It sounds like we need to have you a part of that along the way. So thank you for sharing today.
Thank you, Doug.
Let's now go to Todd Cornell. Todd is an expert on China, living there for 20 years. He's an American originally, and he's now living in Northern Colorado. And in fact, he started the Global Chamber Northern Colorado chapter, which is kind of like Fort Collins in Southern Wyoming. And so we never really imagined that that would be a chapter when we started and mapped out 525, but we added that one in there. Todd teaches language. One of the greatest experiences I had with Todd was we hosted the Canton Fair delegation, a management team, to Los Angeles. And Todd was the interface between the city of Los Angeles and the Port of Los Angeles and Global Chamber and a couple other members and the Canton Fair delegation. And one of the most striking pieces of that conversation was as we were touring the Los Angeles Convention Center, which is huge, it's monstrously large. It just kind of was blowing my mind. One of the people in the Canton Fair came up to us, had done a calculation and said, well, this is very impressive. However, this is the Canton Fair is 10 times larger than this. So, wow. So it kind of gripped us down into reality. Todd, hey, thank you for coming today. And what would you like to share?
Thanks, Doug. Very interesting conversations going, pretty large gamut of a range of discussions about China and Chinese culture. I think that I relate best with Alan and his experience. I was also in Beijing at Tiananmen. In fact, I was working for United Airlines at that time. So a very interesting experience working in Beijing and then getting off work every night, riding my bike down to Tiananmen and just hanging out and seeing what was going on. But luckily on the 2nd of June, I had my R&R, so I was flying to Mexico. And the next morning I wake up in Mexico and there's fire all over the front pages of the newspapers. But that was sort of an experience that I'll never forget. I think that my takeaway is that everything is previous, I think, to Alan was more technological. And I think technology is something that we all understand, we all struggle with. And I think that China has done amazing things with technology. And I think that they have definitely made roadways and built new opportunities for technology. And I think now even like some of the American technology companies are also studying what China has been doing and learning from that. I think that that's an amazing thing. The thing for me, though, I think, is it comes down to foundational. And I think if we can all understand that the foundation of everything that we're hearing is based on a 7,000, essentially 7,000, 5,000, 3,500, depending on how many years you want to say, culture that has been continually growing and expanding and changing in a way that's still very much connected to the earlier roots. The language, the way it's written, the language, the way it's spoken, the way people think, the practices are all still very much based in Chinese historical foundation. Arnold, having grown up in China in the 80s, which is when I was in China, I went to Taiwan in 1985, actually 84. And that is all a part of who the people are. They don't recognize it as much, I think, because they're not thinking about their cultural background as much, because that's something that they just grow up in, just like us. We grew up here, we don't really think about culture. It's just a part of who we are. So sometimes it's hard to really see that so clearly. But the importance of understanding the Chinese culture and being able to work with the Chinese culture is very important for being successful in China. I think that for me, language is the one thing that really got my interest with China. I'd been a language buff since I was 6 years old. And so that was just sort of something that's always been a part of me. Language has been the center of who I am and what I do. And that brings in culture. And so with China, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I started to, through interacting with my Chinese friends and expressions that they would say, and they'd say, oh yeah, that's something Confucius said, or oh, that's something that came out of the art of war, or that's something from the Tao Te Ching, or yeah, that's I Ching, what's I Ching? A few lines. But the whole concept of this yin and yang and all of these things that creates what we know today as the Chinese culture is now molding into something that is coming into the future or into the present in ways that we don't understand the past and the foundation. And having that understanding, I think, helps us to be more successful with China. In 2018, I went back to China for the first time in 10 years. I returned back to the States in 2008. And I went to Guangzhou, to Shenzhen, and I did live in Shenzhen for a couple of years, but I never lived in Guangzhou, but I was very familiar with it because I lived in Hong Kong too. And so before I went, everybody was like, oh, China's changed, the Chinese are different, they're not the same. And I was getting all nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go there and I'm not going to know the people, I'm not going to know the place. But I was really very happy when I got there to find out that they haven't changed. They're still the same. Their outward appearance has changed. The technology that they're using has changed. But what's going on inside their minds and inside their heads hasn't changed, because that's still connected to that 7,000, 5,000, 3,500 years of history. So I think that for me, the thing that I really am passionate about is Chinese culture, the way the Chinese think, their mindset, what gets them, what touches their heart. And I think through being able to communicate with the people in a way that touches their heart, and the Chinese have a huge heart, that's really the best way to be successful.
Very, very thoughtful. Thank you, Todd. We're going to try to finish up at the bottom of the hour. So we've only got about 5 minutes. And so I'd like to go to Abdul Haq and then just open up the floor for any open comments, and then maybe have you close the room. Abdul Haq, here you are. You're a fellow from Morocco who has had a passion for China, like Todd in many ways. What would you like to share today?
Well, I would like to, given my circumstances now, being absent of being in and out of China over the last 3 years, we came to the realization that the biggest risk of doing business in China is being absent of China, is not seeing the changes that are happening there in terms of economy, in terms of technology, in terms of legal, in terms of COVID reaction, businesses, how businesses react to COVID. And I think what Todd said about the cultural aspect that is there, there's thousands of years of history, that's very true, it's very present. The other side of it that is a very fast changing, the one that we're not seeing without being there, with us being outside of China, is how those businesses and the laws and the politics are changing and morphing fast as a reaction to the COVID situation. And I think we'll have a lot of case studies to draw from that over the coming few years or decades. And it reminds me of the saying by Zhou Enlai when he was asked in the 70s about what he thinks about the French Revolution. He said, it's too early to say. That just tells you the depth of what is the perception of time when it comes to mine. I think when Todd was talking, that's what he reminded me of.
Very, very funny. Let's open the floor for a few minutes, and just if there are some other folks who would like to share anything, any thoughts, any additional ideas, or any responses to what you've heard so far, including Min. Min, anything you'd like to say?
I would say, as a student who is studying Chinese culture and Chinese, my major is Chinese commerce. I've learned a lot today, and I'm really grateful to hear from all the experts about China. So I'm really thank you, and yeah.
What is the source of your interest in China?
Because I'm from South Korea, so South Korea is really dependent on China in terms of economy. So it's really important for Koreans to study Chinese culture. So we started to learn Chinese and Chinese culture from middle school students. So yeah, so that that got me in have an interest to study Chinese culture, because it's really helpful for Koreans to learn Chinese culture and Chinese. So yeah, and yeah, it's really
Okay, that's great. In conclusion, Arnold, did you have any final comments that you would like to make, please? Have you got your battery plugged in? Arnold, are you there? And it may not be there at this moment, but we really appreciate. Oh, now we can. Yep. Yeah.
Sorry, I was
really
I
appreciate
sit on the computer and on the mic.
all good. Any final comments you'd like to make?
I think more just that because a lot of people look at China as in like, if you have business in China, you should focus on China. But as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, I think China generally gives us a crystal ball into future of the world in a lot of like culture, economy, technology. And I think it's important to look at it even if you are not specifically working in China or with China. And it's just good for like understanding where things might head to.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that right after Todd talked about how important the last 7,000 years have been in developing, and that's stuck in folks' head. What was how do you respond to that? I mean, it sounds like it's, China should be more part of all of our thinking.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with anything that was said. It's more just adding on to that I think China has always been very kind of like inward, and it's not until very recently that China has started to export culture, especially youth subcultures, and also traditional cultures as well. And I think I just think like the world will be a lot more how do I put it? I think Chinese culture and technology and people will affect and impact the rest of the world more going forward rather than less. So I think it's important to, understand as much about it as possible.
I'd like to add just a little bit. And I think what Arnold is trying to say is, because the worldview of the Chinese culture is so broad and so huge, and there's really not a limitation in that worldview, which they call universe view, that everything is possible. And I think that Chinese philosophy, Chinese culture, and I think everything that's happening in China is all based in the foundation of who China is. And when we are able to understand that, our minds will be blown and the opportunities will go beyond anything that we really understand.
That's probably a really good place to leave it. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you, Alan. Thank all of you. And Ling, you weren't speaking today, but you'll be speaking at our Global Innovation Summit. So thank you for joining us today. And thank all of you for joining us today. My mind is definitely blown, and I'm just going to kind of sit around today, maybe have my cup of tea right now and just kind of try to absorb what you've all spoken about. Thank you for taking the time to share. This is our first of, I think, many conversations that we'll be having about China. As those of you who know Global Chamber well, our focus is on the business side, what opportunities are available. And to be able to understand that, you need to be in there. You need to understand the cultural differences and nuances, and also fundamentally be able to build a business. I was speaking with somebody actually at Thunderbird last night. It was a young man who had an idea for something, and it was funny for him the way he explained it. It was like, here's, he was giving me all these different ideas, and he was asking for help. And I think all entrepreneurs know that at some point, everything seems like somewhat chaotic, and then these ideas spring up, and an idea isn't just like some vague thing. It's like the idea becomes a business. Like, it needs money and employees and, market knowledge and products and pricing. And, there's a lot of components to it. It's a lot of what many of us find exciting about business. If we had to do a nail salon in our local community, that would be a business, but it wouldn't be terribly exciting for maybe anybody on the call. But if you're talking about now understanding what the opportunities are in China and what you can do to be able to be successful there through the cultural nuances and through all of the legal and other aspects that it takes to do business in another country, then it's exciting. And then weave in the 7,000 years that led up to this point that's still in people's brains, and then the future aspects that Arnold talked about, including what's going on in social media. Now we've got some fun things to think about and to do. And so thank you all for setting the stage, which we hope will be a great year globally, and we certainly hope and expect that there'll be more and more entrepreneurs opening up markets and opportunities in China, and we're hoping to help and support that going forward as well. Thanks, everybody. You have a great rest of your day, week, and year, and stay in touch. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Doug.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers.